just to let you guys know, as usual, I am recording the class, so once I get it done, usually we'll get it posted over the weekend on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Illumination Classes, and it'll take me to my YouTube page. If you guys want, you guys can subscribe. I'm actually going to probably start doing a few little short, maybe 10-15 minute videos along the way here as things kind of slow down for me a little bit. So if you want to keep up on that kind of stuff, by all means, please subscribe and you'll get the information. So again, that's Illumination Classes. Just do the search on YouTube. Also, above and beyond the class, if you have any questions for me or anything like that, you could see my email address, illuminationclasses@gmail.com. So if you have any questions about anything that we've covered tonight, feel free to drop me a line, let me know, and I usually get back to people pretty quickly. So hopefully you won't have too many questions, because what I'm going to cover will be covered well. I say that now, right? A couple of things that I wanted to touch on real quick. If you guys are using the Creative Cloud, either the full-on suite or just the photography suite, which includes Lightroom and Photoshop, they just came out with a new major release update today, which I will be using. They've got quite a bit of changes, quite a few things. Again, you guys can go online and kind of check it out. One of my, or a gentleman that I follow was letting me know today, and I'm not sure how far some of you guys get into Photoshop to where you're working with extensions. I personally don't. But he did inform me that there's an issue with bringing your extensions into the latest version of Photoshop. So tonight what we're going to do is I'm going to give you guys a bit of an intro to Photoshop here. And the way that I want to handle this is, my goal is not to get you guys involved in every little bit of Photoshop, but what I want to do is I want to get you guys editing, kind of like what I did with the Lightroom class. Just kind of went through and gave you guys some of the tools and some of the methods and workflows as far as editing is concerned. So that being said, I want to do the same thing here in Photoshop. I want to be able to give you guys a good foundation to get you to start editing, and then as we go along, I'll hold some more advanced classes. But there's a couple things that I definitely want to cover tonight. I want to cover workflow. I want to cover just showing you guys there are a couple of different methods for doing certain techniques, which we'll go over. And one of the ones I get asked about a whole lot is I'm going to do two versions of working with skin softening. So this is going to help a few people out, and you know who you are. With that being said, we're going to dive in. One of the other things I did want to mention to you guys as well, and I talked about this a little bit in the Lightroom class, and then I did a little bit of a mention of it in my pre-Lightroom class, and that was working with the Wacom tablet or Wacom tablet. Now in Lightroom, and I went over adjustment brushes, and those of you who didn't see my Lightroom class can catch it on my YouTube channel, and I'll go ahead and I'll plug that a little bit later on. But Lightroom doesn't really have a lot of provision for some of the usefulness for the Wacom tablet. However, Photoshop does. It allows you to use pressure sensitivity when you're editing, which is huge as far as how you can set up your brushes and so forth. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to real quick. I am on a I say Wacom. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from somebody, I think. If you're, again, I'm going to repeat, if you're on your phone again, if you could just mute the call, you can still hear me. And then if you have any questions you want to ask me, just unmute and go ahead and ask me, because I can hear you guys, whoever's on a phone. So anyway, I'm just going to pick a simple brush over here, and I do use a lot of shortcut keys when I work. So I'll try to cover those shortcut keys too as I go through and use them. So I am working on a Wacom tablet. I have the Intuos Pro Small. It's pressure sensitive. So in other words, if I'm working on working with a brush, if I put pressure very lightly, you can see it's a little bit more, a little bit lighter. But as I add more pressure, I can make my brush a little bit darker. That's only just a minor one thing that you can do with it. If you go to your brush settings, which if you click on your brushes over here, you can open up your brush settings. Oops, where did my brush settings go? Like I said, I just loaded up this version of Photoshop, so things are reverted all the way back to where I started. Here we go. So you have a brush panel. I just went up to view and went to brush panel, and they've got several things that you can adjust over here. Now you can see one of the things in here is, it says under control, it says pen pressure. If any of this stuff is set to pen pressure, then it's going to affect how it works as you're using your brush. So I can take my size, bring it up, and again, as I press down, it'll start from a thinner line or smaller line to a thicker line. Change my diameter, scattering, anything that has pen pressure as an option will allow you to go ahead and use the pen pressure of the pen. Now, one of the other things I had mentioned too is it does take a pretty fair amount of time to get used to, and a lot of people have told me that they've given up on it because they can't get used to it. And again, I repeat, my suggestion for them and for anybody who gets into this is to put your mouse down for a week and just use the tablet. Now, the Intuos Pro, they're called Pen and Touch. So I can either use the stylus, which is like having a pen to paper, or I can use my fingers to do things like pan and zoom, or to pinch to zoom. Right now, if you can, I'm actually using my fingers to zoom in and zoom out of my canvas here. So you can use it like you would a trackpad, basically. But use it for a week. Get used to it. Now, the Intuos Pro line is their high-end line. They have an Intuos line, which is their, I guess, more consumer model. It's a little bit cheaper. I think they start around $99. If you go to their website, wacom.com, you can get some more information. And they actually sell them at Best Buy, too. So if you're interested, you can do that. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this. I'm going to jump over to Lightroom here because I do want to just cover one more thing that I had discussed before in my last class, which was my Lightroom class, and that was going between Lightroom and Photoshop. And real briefly, one of the things that I strongly suggest that you guys do is, if you're working in Lightroom, and I'm going to show you two different methods here, but if you are working in Lightroom, you can easily go between Lightroom and Photoshop and not have to save things out and then open them back up, work on them, save them out, and then open them back up again. So you can actually round trip between Photoshop and Lightroom. So I'll touch on that a little bit. And if you're not using Lightroom and you're just using Photoshop, if you're using RAW files, if you're shooting in RAW, which I hope everybody is, I'll open up a file in Photoshop and kind of show you what Photoshop's method of bringing that file in is, and kind of explain that if you guys have seen or worked with Camera Raw at all. So we'll see. You know, I'll go ahead and I'll go over that, and we'll kind of go from there. So I kind of put the word out there for you guys to send me some pictures and stuff, but I didn't get any response. That's all right. I got plenty here. So I wanted just to kind of go over a couple of different methods of working with a couple of different shots. Reason is because even though your methods and your workflow is going to be the same, there are going to be some variances in what you do to a specific shot. So I've got a couple of kid shots here. I've got a scenic shot, and I've got an adult shot. And you'll find that my workflow is going to be pretty much the same, but my methods are going to be just a little bit different for each. And I'm going to kind of give you guys the do's and don'ts of, you know, of how to handle each type of a shot. And kind of go from there. The only thing I didn't grab was I was going to grab a male shot, but I don't have one off the top of my head here. So I'll kind of explain some things too as I go through in regards to that. So from here in Lightroom, if I grab any one of these shots, and I'm going to start with this first shot down here, you can see in Lightroom I have my right down over here in the kind of lower left hand side, I've got a couple of different views. Right now I'm in what's known as grid view, so I want to switch this over to full screen or loop view. Okay, so it shows me what my shot is. Now if I so choose to, I can do some settings here by clicking on the develop module in Lightroom. For those of you, again, if you want to take the Lightroom class, it's online, and I go over some of the settings and everything. But I'm not going to go over that today. But over here on the right hand side, you can see I've got tons of different settings that I can work with, that I can start processing this picture with. However, I'm going to do everything in Photoshop tonight. So again, if I'm working in Lightroom, if you're working in Lightroom, you can go through, pick any one of your shots. And the way that I'm going to bring it into Photoshop is very simple. I'm on my keyboard. I'm going to hit the keyboard shortcut of Control and E, and that's going to open it up in Photoshop. You can also go into Photo and edit in Photoshop. So out of Lightroom, like I said, Control E or Command E if you're on a Mac, and that's going to bring your photo into Photoshop. So it comes into Photoshop. If you actually look right up here in the upper left hand corner on the tab, it comes in with the file number dash the word edit, and the extension is TIFF. So it brings it in as a TIFF file. Okay, so basically for again, just kind of repeat the process from Lightroom. I clicked on the photo that I wanted to bring into Photoshop. I hit Control and the letter E if you're on a PC, Command and the letter E if you're on a Mac, and that will bring your picture from Lightroom into Photoshop. Okay, so like I said, got a picture of my niece here, so this is what we're going to start working on. Now, I have a workflow that I've kind of developed for myself over the last several years that works for me. I'm going to go through my workflow, but if you guys find that you have a workflow that might work a little bit better for you, then by all means use that. This is just purely a suggestion and kind of the way that I work, because it does make sense to me. So I'm going to kind of go through it in that from that point of view, and then you guys can kind of decide what it is and how it is you want to approach your edit. So in this case, what I'll usually do, a couple of things that I want to kind of suggest. I know a lot of people will come in, and the first thing that they'll do is they'll make a duplicate layer of their picture. What that usually ends up doing is it basically increases your file size. So the way that I'm going to hope that you work, minus my workflow, the way that I'm going to really suggest that you work is to work in separate layers, and you'll see what I mean as we kind of go through this edit. So it's going to be working in separate layers. That way you're not doing any destructive editing to the photograph itself. So the way that I kind of run my workflow, I can always go back as far as I need to go back without harming my photo in any way. And again, my workflow is going to be the same no matter what picture that I'm using, but the methods are probably going to be a little bit different. So a couple things here. Again, I have my background layer over here. If you look at my layers palette over here on the right, and generally what I'll start doing is I will start doing some touch-ups. So any little blemishes, red marks. Okay, my niece is 8 years old, so she's got great skin. It's not a whole lot you have to do, minus maybe a scratch or the occasional red mark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here in my layers panel. If you go down to the lower portion of the panel down here, I've got my new layer icon. So I'm going to click on that. Whoops. I'm going to click on it just once. I'm going to throw that away. And the other thing that I suggest is always name your layers. It'll keep you in order. So I'm going to just name this Touch Up. And this is going to be my Touch Up layer. Now, there are a ton of different methods that different people use for touching up. Some will use the spot healing brush. Some will use the healing tool. Sometimes you'll end up using the clone stamp tool. Various ways of doing it. There's no wrong or right way to touch up a photo. Again, it's going to be all up to you. Really, the only thing is to make sure that that you do things and keep things very clean in this respect. So in this case, what I'm going to use actually is I am going to use the spot healing brush tool. Now again, she's got a pretty good complexion, so there's very little I have to do here. So generally what I'll do is I'll zoom in. So I'll hit Z on my keyboard and I'll zoom into her face, and I'll just kind of look around a little bit, and you can see right here on her nose she's got a little scratch. So again, I'll grab my spot healing brush, and generally when you use any of your healing tools, you don't want to make them, you want to make them just a little bit bigger than the blemish that you're going to get rid of. And generally, if you have a spot like this, and it's right here on her nose, if you have a little spot like this, you don't need to paint over it. You can just tap right on it, gives it a second, and maybe a little bit more on the corner here. So real simple, and I'll show you the before. So there's her blemish, and it's gone. So a little quick before and after. So I will go around and I'll just pick up some of this. She's got a little bit of discoloration over here on her cheek. Very little. Again, you know, they're little kids, and little kids have very good skin, and you don't have to do much to them, unless, of course, maybe they're little boys and they do headers into rocks or something. But keep this pretty clean and pretty simple. Got a couple more here that I'm going to take care of. All right. Okay. So now that I've got that part taken care of, I'm going to kind of look around, and I'm going to sort of see a couple of different things I'm going to kind of look at. And I'm going to zoom all the way out by hitting Control or Command 0. And that zooms me all the way back to up to 100%, or fills the screen. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to, let's see. Actually, the question I've got here, it says for every change or tweak you want to make, you do it on a new layer. With my touch-up, I do on a single layer, okay? And then as I build, you'll see I do all of these other things on their own layer. One thing I did want to mention, though, okay, if you notice, my touch-up layer is, if you look over here in my layers palette, it's a transparent layer, okay? And I'm using my spot healing brush. The spot healing brush samples from the surrounding pixels. So the one thing that you want to make sure, and you want to make sure whether you use the spot healing brush, the healing brush, or the clone stamp tool. And it's kind of weird in each setting, but what you want to make sure that you do, once you set up your blank layer here, you want to go up to the top over here, and you want to make sure that sample all layers is checked, because what it's going to actually do is it's going to actually look at that bottom layer and sample from there, okay? If you're using the clone stamp tool, and I'll switch over to that, over here it says all layers, and there's a little drop down here, and you want to sample all layers, okay? This is when you're touching up. So keep that in mind, because there's other methods for touching up that you'll want to sample the current layer. So in this case right now, I want to make sure that I'm sampling all layers, because it does look at the layer below. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? I'm so used to seeing hands raising up. So once I've done that, and if you look here, and let me zoom back in on her face. Oops. Sometimes my keyboard shortcut doesn't work. Okay. I'm going to zoom back here on her face, and I'm going to turn off the underlying or the background layer. Okay. Keep in mind, again, with my transparent layer, again, I'm sampling from this background layer. So if I turn off my background layer, you're going to see, and I hope you guys can see this, but you're going to see all kind of little tiny spots here. And basically what those are where I hit all the little blemishes and stuff with my healing brush tool. And because they're on that separate layer, if for some reason I need to go back, say somebody has a mole, and that mole is just part of them, so they don't want it erased, this allows me to go in here and I can use my eraser tool. Just hit E on the keyboard for eraser, and I'm going to work right here, kind of in the center right, on this particular spot right here, and I'm just going to erase that. So basically what that's doing is it's erasing that where I covered up that blemish with my spot healing brush. So again, it makes this non-destructive because I am not working on my original layer. I am working on my touch-up layer. I have my, like I said, in this case, my spot healing brush selected, and I have sample all layers, so it's looking at every layer below in order to touch that up. And I'll go back here, and I'll retouch that out again. Okay? So generally the next thing that I'll do, if I don't do this in Lightroom, and because I'm a little bit more acclimated to Photoshop, I have a tendency to do this in Photoshop, is now I'll start working on the overall look of my picture. Now this shot's straight out of the camera, so I'm going to go over here and I am going to, and again, a couple different methods of doing this, but if you look over here on the right hand side, you'll see I have a panel open here and it's called Adjustments. Okay, these are all of the adjustments plus a few others that aren't showing up in this panel, and I'll show you where to find those. But these are all of the adjustments that you can make. Now, a couple things happen here. When I click on an adjustment layer, in this case, I'm going to click on my levels. So if I click on it, I'm going to move this out of the way. A couple of things happen here. You'll notice that I have a new layer called Levels 1. Okay, over here this window opened up, which gives you your levels, and the other addition that you see in here is called a layer mask. I'm going to cover layer masks a little bit more in detail in a little bit, but basically you can have either a white layer mask or a black layer mask. Now, basically the way that I explain a layer mask is, one, I kind of use the saying, black conceals and white reveals. Okay, so right now you're seeing a white layer mask, so I'm seeing all of the underlying pixels of this picture. Okay, so it's completely opaque, or I'm sorry, it's completely transparent, so I'm able to see everything that's under there. So what happens in that case, since I'm able to see everything under there, if I come over here to my levels panel and I grab my arrow here and I start moving it to the left, you'll see the whole picture brightens up. Okay, so that's because that layer mask is not covering anything. Okay, now if I take that layer mask and I invert it, and the way that I would invert it on my keyboard, I hit Control I or Command I on a Mac, and then you can see it's turned from white to black. Okay, now black conceals, which means this now covers everything up. I'm going to go back to white. Okay, and I'm going to click again back on my levels. Now, the other thing that I want to mention to you guys too while I'm here, if you notice where I'm clicking here, I've got 4 corners. And that indicates to me that I am working in this levels panel. If I click on the layer mask itself, again, I've got 4 corners on that. That means I'm working within the layer mask. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. I'm going to click on the levels, and again, I'm going to pump up my whites a bit so you can kind of see a difference there. Okay, so now I'm seeing my levels adjustment over everything. You can see it's kind of blowing out her shirt a little bit. Her face is a little light, so on and so forth. But there might be just certain things that I want to bring out. I might want to bring out her face just a little bit, something like that. So what I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to go back to my layer mask here. Okay, so I clicked on my layer mask, and I'm going to also, here I'm going to name this. If I double click on the name, I'm going to rename it Contrast, I guess. Or I'll tell you what, I'll name it Lighten. So you want to try to use as descriptive names as possible when you're doing this. So I'm going to name this Lighten. Now, everything is being revealed, so you're seeing the change here in my the overall change in the lightness of my shot. So I don't want the whole thing like light. Like I said, her shirt is kind of starting to blow out and stuff, and it looks a little too saturated. So I'm going to invert this mask or cover everything up. So remember, white reveals, black conceals. So I'm going to hit Control, if you're on a Mac, Command, and the letter I. Now you can see it goes back to its original state. Okay? And you can see here that my layer mask is now black. So if I want to start bringing things out, like bringing her eyes out a little bit, bringing her skin tone out a little bit more, lightening up some of those details and everything, what I want to do is I want to use a paintbrush, and this is where your we're working with a tablet really works nicely, because you have a lot more control, not just over opacity and things like that, or how much or how little your brush lays down, but you also have control over the areas that you're working in. It's a little hard to be precise with a mouse, and I was kind of playing around with this today because I was trying to remember what it was like doing this with the mouse. But so I'm going to come in here, I'm going to do some obvious edits. I'm going to lighten up her eyes a little bit, maybe get a little bit more a little bit lighter on her smile and so forth. So if my layer mask is black, okay, the idea is to now punch a hole through it. So imagine you're making a mask out of a paper bag. You put that bag over your head, you can't see it, so what you have to do is you have to punch holes where the eyes are going to be in order to see out of it. Well, this is basically what we're going to do. So by painting with white, if you remember, black conceals, white reveals. So I want to reveal some of the areas that I want to lighten up here. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to grab just a soft brush. So I'm going to click on my brush and grab a soft brush. Now when I do this, I usually use my bracket keys to increase or decrease the size of my brush. In my paint palette over here, again, if you're looking on the left side of the screen, you'll see that my colors, my foreground color is white and my background color is black. Okay, since I want to reveal the lightness change, I'm going to paint in white. Okay, and I'm going to zoom in on her eyes a little bit, and I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut Control or Command plus to zoom in. And then if I hold down my space bar, you'll see I get a little hand there. I can move around my screen as such. Okay, so there's my paintbrush. You guys can see my paintbrush right here. And I'm working right now, if you're looking at the picture, I'm working on her left eye. So my brush right now is at 100%. And there's a reason that I'll do this as well, and I'll explain that in just a minute. So I'm going to start just painting in where her eye is. Okay, and you can see that it's starting to lighten up a bit. I'm going to paint where her right eye is, and give me just a second, I'll show you. So there's after, there's before, you can see where it's darker. There's after, you can see how they're lightened up. Now if you look over here, and it's a little tough to see, it might be a little tough for you guys to see, but inside of this layer mask you're going to see there's two little white dots in there. Okay, and that's where I drew. If I want to see what I've drawn to make sure that I'm filled in correctly and everything, if I hold down my Alt key on my keyboard, if you're on a Mac, Option, and I click on the layer mask itself, it's going to show me where I've painted. So if I need to make a little bit of an adjustment here, I can still paint with white, and all I'm doing now is painting on that layer mask. So I've taken that black layer mask and I've punched two holes in it where her eyes are. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Okay, when I want to go back, I click on my Alt or my Option key and I click on the layer mask again, and it brings me back to my original shot. Okay, so now I want to she's a little she's got little dark circles under her eyes. I don't know if she didn't get enough sleep that night or what. Out too late, I don't know. Anyway, but you can see we got a little bit of a dark area under her eyes. Now there's a couple of ways that I can take care of this. Again, I can stick with working with my layer mask and my brush, and what I would do is I would lower the opacity of my brush quite a bit, actually, maybe about 30% ish. So I just grabbed my opacity slider up here and took it down 27-30%. I'm going to increase my brush size to a little bit bigger. I'll put it over here so you can kind of see how I'm sizing it. And again, I'm using my bracket keys, so the square brackets on the right or on the left. The right one increases the size, the left one decreases the size. So again, just a little bit, maybe a little bit smaller. And then I can start lightly painting in. Now you can see that's getting a little too much in there. Okay, so I don't want to overdo it that much. I don't want to lower my opacity that much. So I'm going to undo that. Control or Command Z to undo that. And actually, it's got to go back a little bit further. Let me grab my history panel here. And I'm going back just enough to get rid of all of that here. Okay. One thing about the Wacom tablet that I mentioned too is it has what they call express keys, and you can actually assign keyboard shortcuts to those things, which is kind of nice. I haven't reassigned anything since I loaded this new version of Photoshop, so I've got to go in and do that still. However, okay, so the method I'm going to use a different method to get rid of or lighten these little areas under her eyes. Okay, so I am going to go ahead. I'm going to stick to this layer mask, this adjustment layer, adjustment being my levels. And again, I'm going to bring up my opacity just a little bit, and I'm going to come down here, and I'm just going to kind of whiten her teeth, or brighten her teeth up. There's actually a couple different methods to doing teeth, and you can see that's not turning out very pretty either. Now keep in mind, teeth are not that white, so again, I can drop my opacity quite a bit and just brighten those up just a touch. Okay, you can see the before and the after, and that is a very, very slight thing. Now, again, keep in mind, teeth are not pure white. They do have color in them. So when you're doing any kind of teeth whitening techniques, keep that in mind, that teeth are not pure white. Now, if you look at her eyes again, I'm going to turn this off. Go ahead and look at her eyes again. Turn this off, turn it back on. You can see the difference in how light they are. Now, if I feel that is too much, there's too much of a levels adjustment there. The nice thing, again, about working this way, because it's non-destructive, is I can come up here in my layers panel, and I can go to my opacity slider, which is right up here on the right, and I can drop that down a little bit. And you can see if I drop it down all the way, her eyes go back to pure brown. And if I just start nudging that up a little bit, I can add just a little bit of light back into them. So I have full control over how much, even if I paint at 100%, I still have control over how much, and I can make those adjustments afterwards. Again, I'm not working on my original layer. I'm building on top of my original layer just by using additional layers. Okay, so now what I want to do is I'm going to start working on getting rid of the little dark circles under her eyes. Now, there's a couple of different methods to do this. One of the most popular methods is dodging and burning. Now, over here in the tools panel, you have your dodge tool and you have your burn tool. Okay, I don't use them. I never use them. The reason is, again, if you use your dodge and your burn tool, you have to use it directly on the photograph, so it's destructive. So there are several different methods out there, and I'm going to cover one of the methods tonight, and I'll do some tutorials on some of the other methods to dodge and burn. in this case, again, I want to do it non-destructively. Okay, so this is one of the methods that I use to do that. So I'll come down here and I will click on, in the lower right hand side, I'll click on my new layer, and again I will name it. I'll call it Dodge and Burn. Okay, again, naming my layers. So the other thing that I want to be able to do is I'm going to work with a neutral color. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under here under Edit. Let me get this out of the way. I'm going to go under Edit, under Fill, and I'm going to fill this layer with 50% gray. Now, gray is a neutral color, so I'm going to use a couple of different things to set this up. So when I hit 50% gray, you're going to see my whole canvas now turns gray. Now, I don't know, a couple you can kind of chime in, but if you've ever used blending modes, up here on the just above your layers, you're going to see a drop-down menu. Right now it's set to normal. Okay, I'll explain a little bit about blending modes in a little bit, but for this particular technique, I'm going to come all the way down here, and I'm going to come all the way down to where it says soft light. And what's going to happen is, because gray is a neutral color, it's going to make that gray now transparent. So you'll be able to see the picture again. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to lighten up these little circles under her eyes, these little dark circles. Very simple. If I want to lighten up something, I'm going to paint white. Okay, and for this right now, just to show you guys what I'm doing here, I'm going to do this at 100%. Increase my, sorry. Let me undo that. Hey, this isn't working the way it's supposed to. Oh, I know why. Sorry, I apologize. Have the wrong tool selected. Make sure you select your paintbrush. Let's see, blending change. Okay. So I've got my paintbrush selected. I'm going to come over here, and if you notice, I'm using this double arrow. If you come over to the left side on the toolbar, I'm using this layer to switch back and forth between my foreground color and my background color. The other way you can do that is use the letter X. So if I hit X on my keyboard, I'm switching my foreground and my background color. Okay, so white. Okay, I can find my... Now, I'm going to just slowly start building this in. I'm at 9%, so that's not going to do me any good. Make my brush a little bit bigger, again using my right bracket key. Now, obviously you can see that's way too much, and I'm working on the right eye. So you can see that's way too much. I'm going to undo that, and I am going to lower my opacity pretty fair amount. Now, next to opacity you have flow, okay, and that's basically how much ink or paint your brush is distributing onto the canvas. So I'm going to keep my flow kind of low, and then I'm going to build this up. So again, I'm using white, and I'm coloring on that gray background, and I'm just doing a single brush stroke. I'm over to the left eye now, and I'm just doing a single brush stroke over and over again to kind of lighten that area up. So again, here's my before, here's my after. Okay, before and after. And again, I'm just painting with white, low opacity, low flow, and then I'm just building on the effect. She's a little dark here under her chin, so again, I can come, or under her lower lip. So I'm going to go in, and again, just brush stroke after brush stroke. So if you're using a mouse, it's right click, stroke, release, or I mean left click, stroke, release. With a pen, you just keep going over it over that area over and over and over again. Now you can see a little bit, I got into her lip right here, her lower lip, and it's kind of darkened that out. So if I need to go back and correct that, again, I hit X on my keyboard, and this time what I'm going to do is make that small. And I'm going to kind of take that out a little bit. Actually, I'm going to go with white and take that crease out. There we go. Okay. And again, when you work on dodging and burning, it's a very, it can be a very tedious thing. You have to be very careful with it. You look at highlights. You look at exactly how your light is hitting to see what it is you want to bring out more in the lighter areas, and what you want to put more into the shadow areas. Now I can dodge and burn on one layer like I'm doing here. So if I were to switch my colors over here, and I'll increase my brush size, and I'm going to go down here and just kind of show you what I'm talking about. Down here into this neck area down here, and I'm going to darken that up a little bit more, give it a little bit more of a shadow. So again, with my black selected and my brush, I'm painting again on the same layer, which is my dodge and burn layer, and you can see again before and after. So there's after, there's before, there's after, there's before. So you can see the shadow on her neck got considerably darker. If I don't like that, I can grab my eraser tool, hit E on my keyboard, increase my size, and then I can just erase that, just because I'm painting on this gray layer. So it allows me just to go ahead and erase it like you would a normal paint layer. So generally what I would do is I would do one layer that's a dodge layer and one layer that is a burn layer. And you can do them separately. The method is exactly the same. You would just have one layer, you'd call it dodge, fill it with gray, 50% gray, paint with white, and then if you add a burn layer, and I'm sorry, dodging, you'll paint with black, burning, you'll paint with white. You can add another layer, name it dodge or burn. Doesn't matter the order that you do these either, so any way is acceptable. But it gives you, again, it gives you a different and non-destructive way. I'm going to get right here in the creases, just a touch. It gives you a non-destructive way to, oops, I'm hitting erase. Sorry. Brush. It gives you a non-destructive way to go in here and then just make some of these subtle things. And again, dodging and burning is a very subtle technique, and it does take a little bit of practice, and it does take a little bit of time, so be patient with it. So again, you can see my before, my after, got rid of some of those little dark areas, kind of brightened her up just a little bit. Okay, so basically when I get to this point, I can make a couple of decisions here. I'm going to zoom all the way out, Control or Command 0. Say I want to bring out some of the highlights in her hair. I can do that. Now, what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to take everything that I've done so far, I want to combine it into one layer, but I don't want to lose any of my adjustments. So I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut, which is Alt, Control, Shift, and E. Basically, that's jumping all of your layers into one layer. So it's going to take all of my adjustments that you see here so far, and it's going to create another layer with those adjustments, but it's going to keep my adjustments intact. That way, if for some reason I need to go back, I can go back. So I hit Control, or Alt, Control, Shift, E. And you'll see right here it created a new layer, And this new layer has all of these adjustments. But as you can see, all of these adjustments are still intact. So I can delete this layer and go back to any one of these adjustments at any time if I need to. Okay. Now the reason that I'm doing it this way is because I need to apply a blending mode to this. I'm going to touch on blending modes real quick. There's really only a couple of blending modes that I use on a consistent basis. Normal obviously is normal, and basically what a blending mode does is it takes whatever layer you're on and it combines it with the underlying layers. So depending on what you're doing, it's going to take any one of your underlying layers and it's just going to combine them. So in this case, what I'm going to do, if you look down here, there's only a couple that I use again, and they're sort of self-explanatory. If you look in this first box here, the first setting is going to give you an indication what the other settings do. So my first setting here is darken, multiply. All these other ones, they are going to darken your image in one way or another. Now I generally kind of encourage you guys to go in and play around with these, but I'm going to tell you I use very few of these on a consistent basis. I'll use multiply if I need to bring something out or need to add a little bit more contrast to something. The next one down starts with lighten, so everyone in this little box is going to lighten things up. So you have lighten, screen, so on and so forth. In this case, we're going to use screen, and I'll show you why in a moment. And then on this one, these are some combinations of lights and darks depending on what you're doing, and you'll see that I'll be using some of these here in a little bit to kind of do certain things, and I'll explain what they are and how they work. Okay, so in this instance, I'm going to use screen. When I do this, you're going to see this whole picture really brighten up all over again. So you can see it's kind of blown out. So what I want to do now is I want to apply a layer mask onto this, because all I want to do is I just want to bring out some of these highlights in her hair. Okay, you can see some of the light brown highlights and stuff like that. So my intention is not to oversaturate the entire picture, or overblow the entire picture, but just bring out some of the highlights in her hair. So again, I will go down here to the very, very bottom of my layers palette, and you'll see a square with a circle inside, and that's your layer mask. I'll click on that once. You can see it puts a white layer mask on my layer, and again, I will name this highlights. Okay. Oops. Apparently I didn't type in there. I'm not known for my spelling, and I don't know why that's not typing in there. I think my keyboard battery is giving me issues. There we go. And what I want to do, again, because I want to just bring out some of the highlights in her hair, I want to conceal this whole layer and then paint with white to just reveal the sections of her hair that I want to highlight. So in this case, I'm going to take my layer mask, and you can see it's got the 4 squares around the corners, and I'm going to invert that by hitting Control and the letter I. So now it's black, so I'm going to be painting in white to bring out some of these highlights. So I make sure that I've got white selected over here in my color palette, which I do. I've got my brush. I'm going to bring my opacity up to 100%. And again, if I bring it, the reason that I usually do it this way, and kind of want to explain the reason why, is because if I'm doing this at 50%, say for instance, when I paint something, and if I lift my brush or unclick my mouse, release the mouse button, and then paint over it again, it basically takes that that particular setting, percentage, and it doubles it. So like, say for instance, I'm going to start off at 10%. If I lift my pen, redraw over it, it's going to add another 10%. And then if I do it again, it's going to add 20%. And then if I do that again, it's going to add 40%. So it's going to double it every single time. This way, if I do it at 100%, I can come over here, use my opacity to tone it down a little bit. So I'll show you that in just a second. So I'm going to draw here 100%, have my paintbrush white, and I'm just going to start hitting some of these highlights in her hair. And again, I'm not brushing over the hair. And again, this is where a pen is really nice to work with, because I have so much control over how I hit my tablet as I'm doing this. So I can get stuff really random in here. And I'm at the point now, I've been using a tablet for so long, I can't even do it with a mouse. It's usually a huge disaster when I work with a mouse. So again, I'm just coming in here, and I'm just working in a very subtle way, just kind of tapping these things through and kind of going back. Usually you want to try to go with the flow of the hair if you can. So you can see you've got, waves here. I don't want to go straight across like this, so I'll kind of go in the direction of the wave. And again, you may not think it's a whole lot, but I'll turn it off. There's before, there's after. There's before and after. And then it kind of gives me an idea as to where I need to maybe add a few more in. Maybe back here behind her glasses a little bit. Bring that out just a touch. Okay. And if I look at this again and I think, it's a little too much, then all I've got to do is come over here to my opacity, and I can drop that back a little bit. Okay, doing that to about 50-ish%, 47. So there's after, there's before, there's after. So very subtle difference, very, very subtle difference when you see that. So again, and if I want to see my layer mask, again, all I do is hold down Alt or Option on a Mac and click on the layer mask itself, and it's going to show me where I've kind of hit those highlights. Okay. Of course, obviously here it looks like kind of a mess, but highlights are not consistent throughout the hair, so they're just kind of all over the place. So it's a method that just takes a little bit of practice, a little bit of work, and you'll be able to get it down. Okay? So now on a kid, and the same goes for if you're working with a male, again, their skin is not such that you need to go through softening to take care of it. Like I said, most kids have great complexions. So I will not soften a child's skin, especially a baby. A baby's skin is very soft. You don't start getting texture in your skin until a little bit later on in life, when your pores start clogging up, and makeup is pretty detrimental to skin if you don't do your skincare correctly or do it well. Those are the things that cause a lot of that stuff later on in life. But as kids, they've got great skin. And when you start softening skin on a kid, it just starts looking kind of weird and plasticky, unless you're really, really super careful with it. But my general rule for me is I will not soften a kid's skin. I'll keep it as is. I'll dodge and burn. I'll take care of little blemishes. But other than that, that's about it. I will just pretty much keep it as is. Now, the other subject that I will not soften is I will not soften males, no matter what age. Again, you can use dodging and burning to soften up some of the wrinkles and maybe just kind of fill them in a little bit. If I'm doing considerably older people, say people 50 and above, I will, I might use some dodging and burning to kind of help settle down those wrinkles. But again, my personal opinion is they have earned those wrinkles. so I don't want to get rid of them. I might tone them down a little bit, but I don't want to get rid of them. So I generally, on females, I will use a very light method of skin softening, but I'll mostly use dodging and burning just to kind of calm them down a little bit. You can use dodging and burning to just sort of fill in the creases a little bit with a little bit of light, so they're not quite as deep, things like that. And again, it's something that just takes a lot of practice, so don't get frustrated with it. It's just something that takes a lot of practice. So, and then men, it just doesn't look good when you soften a male's skin, unless you're looking for a real pretty boy look. And I've not run across that too much. Let me just put it that way. So pretty much this would be about it as to what I would do for a kid. A little bit of dodging and burning, some lightening, a little bit of touch up to get rid of some of the scratches or little tiny blemishes that they may have. A little bit of dodging and burning, like I said, to get rid of the little bit of darkness under her eyes and a little bit around her mouth. Highlights in the hair. Again, she's trying to build a portfolio for herself. So most people who are looking at kid portfolios, they also want them to look as natural as possible. So I'm not going to go overboard with a lot of crazy touch up and everything. Now, if I hold down my Alt key and I come down here to my background layer and I hold down Alt or Option on a Mac, and if I click on the eyeball, it shows me my before, and click on it again, my after. So holding down my Alt or Option key, just keep holding it down, click on that bottom layer, the eyeball of the bottom layer, and you can see it turns off all the other layers. So it shows you the before and the after. So real subtle stuff, nothing too over the top. Okay? Now, as I mentioned, and this will be the only time that I mention this, if I go in here and I just hit Save or Save As in Photoshop here, I've got this in a specific folder, so I'm just going to go ahead. And I'm going to save mine as a Photoshop file. Generally, that's the way I work, because if I ever call it up again, I want to make sure all my layers are intact and everything. Old habit. But when I save, I will save a Photoshop file, and then if I need to, I will save a JPEG if it's going to go online or to a printer or whatever. So in this case, I also do a lot of file management here. So I actually have a folder for this. So I'm just going to hit Save. And it will take a second to save this for me. Now here's the cool part, and this kind of goes back to working inside of Lightroom if you are in fact using Lightroom. Let this save here. Once this saves, I will go back to Lightroom, and this picture will come up in Lightroom as the edited version. So it's going to create another file in there for me. 99, 100. So now when I go back to Lightroom, give it just a second to update. And if you notice, right here is my edited shot. Right next to it is my unedited shot. So again, this allows me to round trip between the two pretty easily, and also keeps the quality of my picture. So you can kind of see how that works when it comes to doing it that way. Now the next one I'm going to go ahead and grab. I'm going to go ahead and grab this Scenic Shot real quick. Scenic Shots they're not overly difficult to edit. A little bit less detail involved. But again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do a Command or Control E, and that's going to send it over to Photoshop. Sometimes you will see this pop up this dialog box. If you've made any adjustments here in Lightroom beforehand, you'll usually want to edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. So I usually keep that first one checked, click on edit. Now, admittedly, I didn't have a decent Scenic Shot in raw, the raw file format. So unfortunately, I'm using a JPEG. I don't do a lot of scenic shots. It's not my strength by a long shot. And I actually happen to be using a different camera for this, and I honestly didn't check the settings, which is bad on my part. But basically, scenic shots, you can kind of see how things are going on here. I want to be able to bring this grassy area out a little bit, maybe bring some of this stuff out here in the shadows, things like that. Now, one of the cool things about these later versions of Photoshop, and this was actually a plugin that was added into CC 2014. So if you're using current versions of Photoshop, one of the I mentioned Camera Raw a little bit earlier. One of the downfalls of using a JPEG is not being able to use Camera Raw to make some adjustments. However, Photoshop has Camera Raw now as a filter, as opposed to it just being a plugin that starts up when you launch a RAW file. So I can actually take and apply RAW settings to this picture to kind of bring some things out the way I'd like to bring them out. What I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to come over here to my background layer, and if you can see right here, I have a lock. Now, in the last two versions of Photoshop, if I just click on that lock, it goes away and unlocks that layer. You can see now it's named Layer 0. Okay, if you're going to use, if you're going to do any effects on this layer or create, what I'm going to be doing right now is creating it as a smart object, then you cannot have that layer locked. So in older versions of Photoshop, pre-CC 2014, you would just grab that lock and then drag it down to the trash can down here. Okay, so in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on this, move this out of the way again. I'm going to right-click on this, and I'm going to come down here. I'm going to say Convert to Smart Object. Now, basically, what this allows me to do is this allows me to add any filters, because filters are generally a destructive thing, and it allows me to add filters in a non-destructive manner. So if you look right here, you can see in the lower left-hand or the lower right-hand corner, I have this little icon here, and this little icon tells me that this is now a smart object. So if I come up here under Filter, great, real smart, Chuck. It's right up here under where it says Camera Raw Filter. Sorry about that, guys. So I'm just going to click on that. Sorry, I will edit that closer, and it'll take just a second. And again, if you've worked inside of Lightroom, or if you've worked inside of Camera Raw, a lot of these settings right here, all of these settings, as a matter of fact, are exactly the same in Camera Raw as they are in Lightroom. So I can make some adjustments from here. So if you look at my picture again, I've got a very nice blue sky, but a lot of this stuff here is kind of falling into shadow. Okay, so what I can do is I can come over here and I can start bringing out my shadows a little bit. So I'll grab my shadow slider and I'll start moving that to the right, and you can see it's only affecting my shadow areas. Okay, bring out my highlights just a little bit more, not a whole lot, because I want to make sure that sky stays nice and blue. Maybe bump up my exposure just a touch and pull my shadows down just a hair. Now this is going to be very much to taste. Okay, bring out my blacks just a little bit more. So I just click OK. once I'm done, and you'll see it's going to process it. Now this is the beauty of having a smart filter. So you can see over here this now drops down, and you can see I have a layer mask, so if I wanted to go in and make a layer mask adjustment I could, and then I can also view my before and after just by clicking the eyeball. It takes a second for it to come back up. Okay, and again, the goal here is not to mess with my original picture, but yet be able to do some editing and make sure that it's non-destructive. Now you can see I lost a little bit of I'm going to move this down here. Lost a little bit of that blue that I really liked in my sky here. So I want to bring some of that back. So again, I can use my adjustment layers, and in this case, I'm going to use a curves adjustment. Now curves, levels adjustment, things like that, they're just different ways of accomplishing kind of the same thing. Again, so I encourage you guys to go in and play with them a little bit. Don't be too intimidated by them because they do take some getting used to. One of the nice things and one of the reasons I use the curves adjustment, I'll explain a little bit more in detail when I edit this last shot that I'm going to edit here, is I can start separating these out into my channels. So I have my RGB or my composite channel, or I have red, green, and blue that I can edit individually, and I'll show you how that works in just a couple of minutes. So I want to bring this the sky back out. I want to get a little bit more of that blue, that depth, that rich blueness. So I'm going to grab my graph here, and I'm just going to pull it down. Now again, one of the things when you start doing this, now you can see overall I'm darkening up the whole picture. The one thing that you're going to have to start doing or training yourself to do is look at just the area that you're going to change. So in this case, I am looking just at the sky. I'm not looking at the ground because I know I'm going to put a layer mask to be able to bring that sky out. So I'm not looking at the rest of the shot. So I'm only looking at the sky. That's where my main concentration is. So I'm going to bring the blues. So now I've got nice blues back in the sky that I like. So I'm good here. And I can call this sky. And again, name your layers. I've gotten out of the habit of naming my layers, and I should be shot for that, but I can't teach you guys bad habits. So right now I'm revealing the whole layer. Okay, so I want to hide everything. So remember again, white reveals, black conceals. So I'm going to conceal this whole layer by turning my layer mask black. Now I just want to see my sky. So I'm going to paint with white on my black layer mask to reveal that sky. So I'll grab my brush, make sure that I'm on white over here in my color palette, make sure that my layer mask is selected, again the little four corners you'll see, make my brush a little bit bigger by using my bracket key, my right bracket key, 100%, and I'm just going to start filling this in. Now, when I was in kindergarten, let's go way back, I had trouble staying in the lines. So this takes a little bit of practice as well. Since I'm doing this kind of in a quick, with a quick method, generally what I would probably do is I would probably create a selection of the sky and really not try to do a lot of coloring in like I'm doing. So make it a little bit more accurate, I guess. Because when you start getting near the edges and near the mountains and stuff like that, you can start kind of overflowing in there, and then you get kind of weird lines and stuff. One of the things I'll do in a future class, a very close future class, probably my next class, is I'll go through on how to make selections, because selections are really a very good technique to have down. So again, I'm going to hold down my Alt key. I'm going to click on my layer mask, And I'm going to see, I've got it pretty much. I'm going to fill in that little area there where it's kind of dark, where the black is coming through. And if you notice, I am using a soft brush, so you can see the soft edge, so there's not a harsh transition between the mountains and the sky. Okay, so again, I'm going to click on that layer mask again, and this is my before, and this is my after for my sky. Now you can see, like I said, I got a couple of edges right here, but it's nothing that I'm going to worry about too much. Now, again, I can continue to adjust this, make some more adjustments if I wanted to, and if I felt that I needed to bring the green out a little bit more in this area here. I can go in, I can grab, say, a levels adjustment. I can bring up the grass a little bit, and again, and kind of go for that rich sort of green look in my grass. And again, I'm going to put a layer mask on this because you can see it just blew out my sky. So again, I will invert that layer mask. I would name it ground or something like that, but I'm not going to right now. Again, I'll be painting in white. Nice, and I'll get a nice bigger brush so I can cover a little bit more area. So I can start bringing these areas in. Might increase the flow on my brush here. Sometimes it takes a second for things to catch up. I got a lot of things running, so so again, I can just kind of bring in these areas even just a touch more, and just bring that out a touch more. So again, you can see here's my let this catch up with me here. There's my after, there's my before, my after, and my before. So you can see how I'm using layer masks to really get in here and really change the tonal quality of my shot. So again, I'm not fixing anything. Basically, what I'm trying to do is I'm just trying to enhance certain things within the shot. So, and that's what your main goal is to be able to enhance things, not to be able to fix things. One of the things I do tell my students when they're done photographing stuff is I tell them, don't bring me in anything that needs to be fixed. We want to work on getting the best shot that you possibly can, bringing it into Photoshop, bringing it into Lightroom, and just enhancing it a little bit more. Okay. Now, a lot of people, and I don't know if, who's been in my last few classes or not, but a lot of people have told me, well, I don't want to have to use Photoshop. I want to get great shots straight out of your camera. That's a great goal to have, but I'm going to tell you guys right now, even in the old film days, photos were manipulated in one way or another. We used to do dodging and burning in the dark room. I come from a film background, so I used to do dodging and burning in the dark room, and we used to sit there with a little circular cutout on a wire hanger, and would just dodge as we were exposing the film. We would dodge certain areas that we either wanted to bring out, or we would burn other areas that we wanted to make those adjustments. So these are just methods that were used a long time ago. It's just a different way of doing it now. Okay, so let's take a quick 10-minute break, and I'm going to get into one last edit that's going to involve a little bit more, and it's going to be a little bit more stylized. So I want to kind of show you guys the workflow. And again, if you notice, my workflow is pretty much the same here. So that stays pretty consistent. But I do want to show you more of a higher end edit. And I will talk through and work through it pretty quickly. And then you guys can go back and kind of watch it again if you didn't catch everything. But please feel free to continue to ask questions. You can type in, again, you can type any of them in if you happen to be on the phone. Just unmute your call and you can talk to me. I'm going to be offline for just a couple of minutes, so let's come back in at about 8:35-ish, 8:36, and we'll do this final edit. Okay? We'll see you soon.